Bonjour, bienvenue à ton tuto de grammaire aujourd'hui. Et là, on est dans le livre de grammaire, bien entendu, grammaire progressive du français. So we're obviously in our grammar books, as per usual, and we're on chapter 26 of the book. And we're looking at verbs in IR, that end in IR, RE, or OIR. Okay, so when you learn when you first start out with your French, you obviously learn the really irregular verbs like avoir, être, aller, perhaps faire, and they're sort of like standout different kinds of verbs, aren't they? Completely irregular and unique. And then we tend to go on and we learn about ER verbs. And the great thing about ER verbs, of course, is that they end in ER. That's why they're called ER verbs. But the great thing about ER verbs is they're really, really consistent and they behave the same. It doesn't matter what ER verb it is. And there are literally thousands and tens of thousands, no, not tens of thousands, but there's 12,000 verbs in total. There's literally thousands of ER verbs. After that, it gets a little bit tricky about giving categories. And I'm going to demonstrate to you what I mean by that using this page from the grammar book. So we have a category of verbs that we call IR verbs. Now, straight away, you might think, well, okay, that's like ER verbs. That means all verbs that end in IR. But unfortunately, that is not the case. So we're going to have a look at what I mean by that. So we've got IR verbs that will align with the verb finir, but we also have IR verbs that don't act like dormir, that don't act like finir, and we'll have a look at the detail of that today. But when we are talking about IR verbs, actually, for me, I would call them the verbs that align with finir. So let's just have a look at finir in La Bécherelle, which is the book that I recommend that you use for your verbs. This is what French children use, and why not follow exactly what the French education system is using. So in my book, it's verb number 6. In your book, it might be a different number because we've all got different editions. There's lots of editions out there, but the page will be essentially the same. So here you say it's a deuxième groupe. So they've given it a second group. So the first group are ER verbs, the second group are IR. But actually, this is verbs that work like finir. So finir would be the page that you'd be sent to for verbs that work like finir, because finir is the model. And so, for example, if we had a verb like choisir, which works like finir, then we would be sent here and we would just be looking at, well, actually, there's the infinitive. I'm taking the IR off and I'm adding these endings on the end. And that would work for other verbs that where you're in the Bécherelle, you're sent to this page. So what does it sound like? Je finis, tu finis, ils, elles, on fini, nous finissons, vous finissez, ils, elles finissent. So notice that the first 3, they sound the same when they're spoken, and that's what we're interested in, what they sound like. But then when we get into the plurals, notice that double S changes the sound. So nous finissons, vous finissez, ils finissent, elles finissent. So that's where we're starting to see a little bit different from anything we've seen before. Okay, let's go back to our grammar page then. So up here at the top of the page, we've got some example sentences. So, vous maigrissez quand vous suivez un régime? Oui, je maigris pendant une semaine, puis je regrossis. So, do you get thinner when you follow a diet? Yes, I get thinner for a week and then I put it all back on again. I get fat again. If you put re in front of any verb, it means again in French. You can't do it on every verb, but you can try, trial and error. So we've got the verb here. This is maigrir, the verb maigrir, and that's an IR verb that works like finir. So it would follow. So we've got the double S going on in there that we've just seen in the Bécherelle. And we've got the IS that we've just seen there. And we've also got the verb, we can have the re, which is just a bolt on at the front, but the actual verb is grossir, which means to get fatter. And that works in the same way as finir as well. So, verbe en IR a 2 radicaux. Okay. So this is what they're saying here, is that radical, which is a singular, is what we know in English as the stem. So what they're saying here is we've got IR verbs with different kinds of stems. You can think of it that way if you like. That's one way to present it. Personally, I think of finir-based verbs as being IR verbs, and then I categorize these ones that don't work like finir separately as a sort of like another group. But you could call them what you like, however the categories work for you, because you've got to find a way to categorize your verbs in order to recall the patterns. Because basically we're looking for a pattern, aren't we? So let's just recap again. How does finir work, which is our base verb that we've just seen in la bécherelle. So je finis, IS, tu finis, IS, il finit, IT. It's all pronounced the same. Nous finissons, double S, and then our familiar ONS, which we would expect, wouldn't we, for nous. Vous finissez, we've got our double S and the EZ as we'd expect. And il or elle finissent, double S, and then the ENT as we would expect it. Now, would you like to have a go at choosing applaudir, which you can guess the meaning of, which is to applaud? It works in the same way. Do you want to just have a go in your head or writing it down, superimposing applaudir onto this pattern that we're seeing as finir as our base verb? So see if you can run applaudir all the way through using finir as your base. Just if you want to say that out loud, say it in your head or write it down. It's up to you. Good. Okay. Now, finir begins with a consonant, but applaudir is a vowel. So I'm sure you got the J apostrophe in there as well, didn't you? So it will be j'applaudis, IS, tu applaudis, IS, il applaudit, IT. Nous applaudissons, vous applaudissez, ils or elles applaudissent. Run that S through because we've got a vowel. So let's hope you got that. So here we've got some other examples here. So choisir, to choose. Guérir, do you know the meaning of guérir? Guérir is to heal, as in to get better. Ralentir, you might see this when you're whizzing down a French motorway, perhaps it means slow down. And démolir, you might guess, which is to demolish. Okay, so all of those verbs look like that. But even if you weren't sure, you could say, well, I don't know whether applaudir works like finir or works like some other kind of IR verb in the way that it follows the pattern. Well, the best way to go is, in my mind, is to look in your bécherelle. You might have another verb book, look it up. And, you know, you just look up as many times as you need, and eventually that will help it sort of like settle in. Oh, I know that that's an IR verb like finir, and you can be pretty confident of that. Now, something else that's quite interesting about IR verbs is ces verbes expriment un processus ou une transformation. Beaucoup sont formés sur un adjectif, grand, grandir is our example. So quite often with IR verbs that work in this way, they express a process or a transformation, and a lot of them are built off of an adjective. So this adjective, big, bigger, or tall, taller, or big, and that's the grandir can mean to grow, but you can see why it comes off of grand, grandir, yes. So all we've done is we've taken the adjective and we just added an IR onto the end. So that's quite nice to sort of like see where it's coming from as well. And we've got other examples here. So you can probably guess the meaning of this. Blanchir comes from the adjective blanc, obviously. So blanchir means to whiten, can be associated with laundry and money laundering, you know, that kind of thing, same as it would be in English. So that whitening sort of like process or transformation, really. Grossir we've talked about, which is to get bigger. Rougir, what could rougir mean? So that's coming off of the adjective rouge, obviously. Yeah, rougir, to go red, to blush. Vieillir, try saying that if you want to have a little bit of practice of pronunciation. Vieillir, which means to get older. So it's coming off of the feminine, isn't it? Adjective vieil, vieillir. And there's lots more like that as well. And there's more examples in the book when you look at the exercises as well. So that's useful to know, isn't it? Because actually you could kind of guess that, you know, you might say, well, sale, for example, means dirty, S-A-L-E. How could I say too dirty then? How do I turn that into a verb? Well, let me just try that with an IR on the end. Salir. And that does actually work. It's not always going to work, but it's a route that you can take to actually say, well, okay, I can kind of guess what the verb is going to be. Or if I hear it, I can guess what the meaning is because I can make that connection now that an adjective can turn into a verb if we add an IR on the end. Now, don't ask me why, because I don't know the answer. But naître, connaître, paraître, they all work like finir. And actually, there was a theory to have a little, maybe because it's got a hat and then it's a TRE. That's good enough theory for me, you know. So then they work the same. So let's just take naître. How would that work? See if you can push that through. We've got some example here of it. Try and push that through the finir model, that pattern, and see if you can make that work. Naître. All right, can you make it work? So, je n'ai. So, N-I, well, N-I-S. So, we're taking the TRE off, yes. So, je n'ai, tu n'ais, il naît, nous naissons, vous naissez, ils naissent. Let's try it with connaître, to know. How would that work then? We're going to take the TRE off. So, je connais, tu connais, il connaît, nous connaissons, vous connaissez, ils connaissent. That's how it works. So that means to be born, that means to know, and that means to appear, to seem. So that's how those IR verbs work. Now we've got an example of another IR verb, and it's completely different. And for me, actually, you know, I like the way they have put these side by side, but I never think of these side by side in my own mind because they work so differently. So what's funny about the pattern that you can see for dormir? So it's different, isn't it? Because we're taking actually MIR off of this is our infinitive. We're taking MIR off and being left with a stem of DOR and then adding endings on for the singular, for the je, the tu, and the il. But we're keeping the back to the M for the plural, and then we're adding our endings on. So how does that sound? So je dors. Remember, don't pronounce those S's. Je dors, tu dors, il dort. Nous dormons, vous dormez, il dorme. It's nothing like the finir one, really, is it? I mean, maybe you can see there's an S and a T, but you know, I wouldn't connect the two. But what it tells us is that once we get beyond ER verbs, we've got no definite group anymore. We're going to have to sort of like subcategorize things. Okay, so we've got the subcategory of finir, and maybe we've got the subcategory of these IR verbs. So we notice that partir, same idea, yes. So we've taken the TIR off, haven't we, for the singular, and we've taken the IR off in the plural, and that's how we've arrived at our stem, and then we've added our endings on. So if that's the case, then how would that work for sortir, that works like partir? Can you run that through the model? Say it out loud to yourself, say it in your head, write it down, whichever works best for you. Well done. So, je sors, tu sors, il sort, nous sortons, vous sortez, ils sortent, elles sortent. Yeah, and it would be the same for sentir and mentir. We've got the same thing happening with servir here. So, je sers, tu sers, il sert. Nous servons, vous servez, ils servent. Now, can you do it for a reflexive verb? We're still saying the present tense. So we'll make it reflexive. So se servir, push it through this model the same. Have a go. Well done. So did you get je me sers, tu te sers, il se sert, elle se sert, on se sert, if you want all of them. Nous nous servons, vous vous servez, ils se servent. Excellent. Well done. Well done. And here we've just got a little note down here just to remind us that if we're tempted to pronounce those S's, we don't in this case. So they've done a little, little line through there to remind us. So je pars, je sors, je dors, je vis, je suis. Now, what verbs are these? Because when you see a verb conjugated like that, it's good to say, well, I want to know what the infinitive is, because if I know what the infinitive is, I can do anything with it, can't I? So je pars comes from what verb? Partir, of course. Je sors comes from, voilà, sortir. Je dors comes from dormir. Je vis comes from vivre. Oh, by the way, hold on, we've got an RE there. Okay. And je suis comes from suivre. Ah, suivre, because être wouldn't come on this page, be on this page. That's a tricky one that they've just dropped in with no explanation whatsoever here. The verb that comes from is suivre. So if you're thinking, hold on, Ellie, what are you talking about? That's être. Have a look in your Becherel, look up the verb suivre and apply this logic here and see why that is the case. Thank you very much for being here. And I hope you found that useful, little reminder, perhaps something new. And I'll see you again soon. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Au revoir.